Привit, moi druzy. Hello, my friends. My name is Darren Gerdes. I am a professor who does these daily updates on what's going on in Ukraine. Today, I want to talk about just a handful of things. I want to talk about where the battle lines are now and what's going on, what the movement is around Bakhmut and what's coming in the future. I want to talk about the earthquake response in Turkey and Syria, and that parlays into the next issue, which is the value of reputation. And I've been talking about this reputation and credibility thing for a couple of days, but it's really, really important for you to understand when we're looking at all the factors going into what's happening in Ukraine, not just on the battlefield, but all the geopolitical factors. And then I'm going to try something new, a kind of a news lightning round, rather than going over all the news in great detail as I have, just kind of clipping through it as quickly as I can. Then 1 year ago today, and we'll be done. Thank you for your time. I know you could be doing other things, and I really appreciate that you're taking the time to be with me today. So we're going to start here. There's intense fighting, keeping pressure up as Ukrainian officials warn of impending Russian offensive. So according to Radio Free Europe, the battles for the region are heating up. According to the governor who said that the Russians are throwing new units into the battle and eradicating our towns and villages. So the Russians are starting an offensive. I don't know that this is the offensive, but they're increasing the intensity around Bakhmut and a number of other places along the front line. Ukraine also has its own planned counteroffensive, but all of that depends on when they're going to get the tanks and the supply of infantry fighting vehicles and other weapons and whatever, because they can't really start until they have those in their hands. The British Ministry of Defense, meanwhile, said that Russian forces have only managed to gain several hundred meters of territory per week. That's not very good. Okay, this is almost certainly because Russia now lacks the munitions and maneuver units required for successful offensives. So that's good news. Senior commanders likely make plans requiring undermanned, inexperienced units to achieve unrealistic objectives due to political and professional pressure. Now, if you want to understand why that is, go back to yesterday where the ISW was assessing what Putin is demanding as opposed to what he can actually realistically expect from his soldiers. So I think this is great news. Asking them to do more and having them salute and say, yes, I'll go do it, and then not be able to do it is a great recipe for disaster. I think that's wonderful. Okay, here's the ISW. Again, today, former Russian officer Igor Girkin forecasted that the Russian decisive offensive will not be successful until Russia mobilizes more manpower, industry, and economy. But Putin doesn't want to do that because that's taking a political risk that he doesn't want to take. Girkin claimed that an attack without such mobilization would shortly culminate. I think that's fair. A little bit further down, we have some fun with President Putin, who continues to open the door for further institutionalized corruption in Russia through legislative manipulations. Now, I talked about this the other day, and I'm not sure if this is the same bill now that Putin just signed or if it's something different, but Putin signed a decree on February 6th, that's yesterday, that allows Russian deputies and senators not to publish their incomes in the public domain. The law will allow these deputies and senators to publish their incomes in an anonymous form that does not contain their personal data. So as if Russia's not already corrupt. Now you're giving them legal means to hide, and that's going to become very bad. Finally, we have the Kremlin continues to deny Wagner Group financier Prigozhin legitimacy by a court ruling, and Prigozhin's appeal in the Russian nationalist information space appears to be on the wane. The Mill blogger stated that Prigozhin's manipulation of the information space, specifically his skill in trolling, had allowed him to gain more political influence than the Russian defense minister, but it's on the wane. So I like to see the infighting because that's going to have a dampening effect on their ability to actually conduct the war. Okay, let's turn our attention to Turkey. Yesterday there was an earthquake in Turkey and northern Syria. So here's the president of Ukraine, Volodymyr Zelensky, talking about today we have very tragic news from Turkey and Syria. There was a powerful earthquake there, many casualties, thousands of homes destroyed. Sincere condolences. Ukraine immediately responded and offered Turkey support in the rescue operation. I think that was really good. I talked about that yesterday. Good on them for acting decisively in the middle of the struggle of the war that they're in. This is a great thing for them to be doing. And they're not the only ones. Russia is sending troops. as aid workers to both Turkey and Syria. They're sending about 100 aid workers, if I have my facts correct. And here's RT talking about, yeah, more than 100 rescue workers on board been sent over to Turkey and Syria. Syria is kind of an ally of Russia, and they've worked together very nicely. Autocrats tend to like each other. I mean, the more autocratic you are, the more that tends to become your peer group. And the United States is also sending relief workers, USAID workers are being sent to Turkey and Syria. I mean, that's kind of us to be sending to Syria. Turkey, no brainer, right? But now this leads into my next point, and that is credibility. What would happen if the U.S. didn't send aid workers when there was a disaster or something? And we could, and we have the ability and the means, but what would happen if we didn't? How would that look on the world stage? I mean, that's really what I want to address next. So I had this thought, and it goes back to the balloon incident. So I was talking about the credibility of the U.S. is at stake. And by the way, if you don't believe me that this was a big thing in the United States, watch the State of the Union address. I'm not taking a swipe at Joe Biden. Joe Biden recognizes that the credibility of the United States is at stake with that balloon that came from China and just went right over the entire country without anybody doing anything about it until they got over the Atlantic and then he shot it down. But credibility. Think about what Biden thinks about credibility. Let's start with him. He thinks I have X number of years of experience in office, and he does. And so he's got a tremendous resume. And so personally he has credibility, but he has to defend the credibility of the United States. When the United States says, we'll defend you to the end, we have to actually step up and do that, or we lose credibility and our allies start to wonder, will they be there for us when they're in a pinch? So credibility is important. Now think about Boris Johnson. Boris was the first man on the ground after Russia kind of pulled back a little bit. He was on the ground in Kyiv when it was still dangerous. Massive credibility for both Boris, who's very well liked in Ukraine, and for the UK for being the pointy end of the spear for the assistance. Think about Putin and what his credibility is. It's almost like an evil opposite. I think the ISW article I read yesterday was one of the most profound things. If you haven't seen yesterday's video, please go back and watch it. One of the most profound things that I've read in a long time, where Putin, he likes to, show his bravado, walk around shirtless, wrestle a bear, do those kind of things to show how macho he is. And he likes to project this, don't screw with me or I'm going to nuke you kind of demeanor. And I don't think he's really there. I think he's far more risk averse. And there are other things that point to this beyond the ISW article. He wears a bulletproof vest whenever he goes out in public. He's been hiding in a bunker for a long time. He has body doubles. There's a lot that shows that he's really risk averse. He likes to promote the myth that, the cornered rat. I've heard this a number of times, like in his biography or something, he talked about a rat being cornered and it kind of attacked because he was backed into a corner. And this is like the myth that he projected around himself for who he is and what a tough guy he is and how he will act if you cross him, that kind of thing. But I don't think it's there. I think that's a sham. It's a facade. And I think he's really a lot weaker than we think. Now, on the other hand, Zelensky's a lot stronger than we thought, right? Everybody, both Biden and Johnson at the time thought that Zelensky was going to run, and he didn't. He said, I need ammunition, not a ride. And we're like, whoa, hey, he's going to stand and fight. All right. He had instant credibility because of action. So credibility is very meaningful. Now, while I'm on this thought, I had this other thought. Somebody put in one of my comments they were kind of joking because they were saying, hey, it's a shame that you only have but 2,000 and change subscribers. I mean, this is good stuff. And I said, sorry, I know a lot about what I'm talking about Ukraine. I do not understand YouTube or why I have so few or why some trickle in and then there's a burst and whatever. I don't understand it. And he said, well, you need to put a hot woman in Ukrainian clothes on a cover and just talking about clickbaiting and that kind of thing. And I said, okay, well, that's kind of a funny thought. And so I actually thought, to mock this up, something like, who is hotter? And then you have the Miss Universe contestant from Russia and the Miss Universe contestant from Ukraine. And then when you open it up, I say, actually, this was clickbait, but please watch this video because this is a daily update from Ukraine or something along those lines. I actually even seriously thought about doing it. But then my senses came to me and I thought, how much credibility would I lose? right? Now, so I have to be incredibly credible with everything that I say. That's why I show you, when I show you everything, I show you the news headlines and then I show you the highlights because I'm explaining exactly what happened. I don't just say stuff. I just don't, like, people will say, well, this happened because somebody said it. Anybody can say anything. So credibility is very important. And to me, in my line of work as a professor, I have to cite my sources. I have to show you this actually is true. Now, that credibility is very important, and we have to make sure that we understand that, because why these leaders do what they do is very often to defend their credibility. And if you understand that, you understand a lot about what's going on. So let's go into other news now. And we're going to go into a kind of a speed round, a lightning round of news, and I'm going to go very quickly. Norway looks to donate $7.3 billion. That's billion with a B, right? That makes them a huge donor, one of the big players. Over 5 years, yes, but still, nonetheless, okay, if you go down here in fine print, 75 billion kroner, that's 7.3 billion over 5 years to Ukraine. The head of Russia's Tiva Republic sends representatives to Russia-occupied Donetsk after complaints. Why? Because some of his people were being abused, and good on this guy for actually sticking up for his soldiers that have been sent to the front lines in Ukraine. His soldiers were being abused, and he wants to know what's going on. Tiva Republic, by the way, if you don't know where that is, and I even had to look it up, is down here just above Mongolia. It's part of Russia. Abuse of soldiers is rife in the Russian military. As far as I can see, Ukraine releases a video of appearing to show Russian troops beating on their own wounded officer. Why? Well, their officers are just treating them like chopped liver. I mean, they're expendable soldiers, and they know it, and they don't want to, like, I explain to my students in class, the way that productivity works is not watching people sitting there in their chairs and monitoring how much time they're spending. No. If you have my back, if you demonstrate that you have my back, you get my heart. I'll go through a wall for you if you show that you care for me. What the Russian officer corps is doing is almost exactly the opposite. Switzerland may renounce its neutrality. That is absolutely amazing. Remember, Switzerland wasn't even in World War II? Okay, now there's a reason why they got to sit out, because they were armed to the teeth, and the Germans knew that if they went up there, it was going to be very, very costly to take Switzerland. They probably could have done it, but at too much, it would have been a Pyrrhic victory. All Swiss men, I believe, at least at one point, were required to have a firearm in their house, and they all had previous military service. So, okay, we want to be neutral, but we're part of the Western world, said Burkhardt. This is the FDR party. Terry Burkhardt submitted a motion to allow arms re-exports to other countries. He added that Switzerland should not support Russia. We should not have the veto to stop others from helping Ukraine, he told journalists. If we do that, we support Russia, which is not a neutral position. There's something to that. Now, Switzerland is divided about that. The Green Party and the Swiss People's Party are on the other side of that, calling it a slippery slope. But nonetheless, it's absolutely amazing that Switzerland's even considering this. In other news, Ukraine withdraws its 19 million Russian Soviet-era books from their libraries. And while I hate the idea of book burning and I love books, I get it. If the Soviets were trying to overrun my country, I would want to get rid of all their propaganda stuff as well. I think in the American experience, we did this by drinking coffee and by mangling the English language almost beyond recognition. You Brits, tell me if I'm wrong. As for the Americans, support amongst Americans for Ukrainians to reclaim its territory is still pretty high. Gallup poll showed that as of yesterday, poll shows that 65% of U.S. adults polled want the United States to support Ukraine in reclaiming its territory. That's pretty significant margin. So I wouldn't worry about U.S. support for Ukraine. In Russia, a prosecutor seeks 9 years in prison for a Siberian journalist charged with discrediting the Russian armed forces. This kind of things happens. People went to jail for holding up blank cardboard at a protest, and they went to jail for that. So far in the war, almost 1 year later, almost 8 million people have fled Ukraine, 5.3 million are internally displaced, and 17.6 million, or about 40% of the population, need humanitarian assistance. That is where we are in this war. Now, China's watching what's going on, and so is Taiwan. Taiwan's going to speed up development of drones for military use because they're watching the lessons of Ukraine, as is President Xi. And if it goes well for Ukraine, Xi is a little less likely to be antsy to take Taiwan, in my estimation. Okay, the last one in the lightning round, this 102-year-old Ukrainian woman, she survived the Holodomor, and she is now making ghillie suits for Ukrainian soldiers. Like, good on her. Like, that's freaking impressive. Okay, let's look at what happened in the news 1 year ago today. So, it's February 7th, 2022. 1 year ago today, Macron seeks decisive next few days for Ukraine. So they're having political meetings and trying to, no, Putin, don't do this. Macron, who has pushed his diplomatic credentials, held more than 5 hours of talks over dinner on Monday with the Russian president. I think Putin already decided by this point. It was really just an exercise in frustration. The next few days will be decisive and will require intensive discussions, which we will pursue together, Macron told reporters. Meanwhile, German Chancellor Scholz at the same day was saying that they wouldn't explicitly say that Nord Stream 2 pipeline would stop in the event of a Russian invasion. That's because they were addicted to cheap Russian oil. The Russians knew what they were doing. Merkel made a great deal that caught them in a world of trouble. Right? It was a wonderful deal, except you got to be careful of who you're dealing with, because that oil was cheap, and now they have to go and find alternative routes since then. And to their credit, they have, in very short order, figured out new ways of getting their energy. Okay, if you got value out of this video today, would you consider liking, subscribing, leave me a comment, tell me what I could do better, or what you would like to hear me talk about. If you want to support me personally, you can buy me a cup of coffee. If you want to support the effort in Ukraine, you can give directly to United 24. The links for all these are below. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being the kind of person that cares about Ukraine.